Food can be a major source of anguish for people with autism. In fact, eating disorders are extremely prevalent for those who are neurodivergent. The reason for this is because it's a coping mechanism, just like other coping mechanisms or self-soothing mechanisms that people might have when they are dealing with the anxiety, the difficulties around autism. And I was no different. I'm Dr. Becky Sage. This is Spoonie Squared, where we talk all things living with chronic illness and neurodivergence. I was diagnosed with ASD when I was 41 years old, and I have been living with that diagnosis now for 3 years. And of course, like so many of us, my life was impacted for a long time prior to getting that diagnosis. So I wanted to talk about food today because I actually found something. I found this writing that I did. And I can't remember exactly when I did this. It's very weird because it's like typed out and printed out. And I wanted to have a read through it because for me, I suffered with an eating disorder for a really long time. It really impacted developmental years in my life from being about 15 all the way up through my 20s. And then eventually I sought treatment and was able to mostly overcome it. Of course, you kind of like still have those tendencies and it's not something that goes away, but it is something that I don't really have to think about all that much anymore. Thank God, because for a large proportion of my life, I thought there was absolutely no way I was ever going to get over having an eating disorder. And like I said, it was a coping mechanism. So it was something that, even though it was horrendous, and I felt like it was just costing me so much in my life, it was still a source of safety somehow. So I thought it'd be really interesting to read through this. Obviously, if you have any challenges around eating or eating disorders, disordered eating, then some of this may be triggering for you. I'm going to try and talk about it in a way that's sensitive, and I'm not going to go into specific details, but I thought it might be interesting for you to see like where my mind was back in the day and to talk a little bit about how I overcame it and how it's linked to my autism. So let's start from the beginning. And I want to say before I start reading this, just because I wrote this at a certain point in time does not mean that I still think everything I wrote here, that I don't think that it was written from a difficult place, from a naive place. And I will dive into that in a minute. So let's get started. An eating disorder is not the same as living up to the idea of body perfection. So even that first line really gives away, I think, that for me, the eating disorder was something that probably was related to neurodivergence, because I actually remember speaking to other people who, like friends who'd gone through eating disorders, and for them it really was about body perfection. It was about living up to an ideal. And, you know, we heard so much in the news that a lot of issues with eating disorders were to do with what we saw on billboards, in magazines. And I'm not saying that that wasn't a factor, but for me, it was something that went far beyond that. It wasn't really about like my physical appearance or my aesthetic. The next line, this is the bit we might find problematic right now. If you're a size 6 and a woman, it is just as hard as if you're a size 12, 16, 20, 24. And most likely it's just as hard to be a man. Now, I completely understand now that that's really probably comes across as like super insensitive in so many ways. What I was trying to say, and it goes on to this in a second, but of course, yeah, we know that like thin privilege is a thing. So, and I've always walked around in this like pretty small body. And so I've got no idea what it's like to experience life in a different size body. I know the stories, I know what I hear from other people. And yeah, that's clearly a pretty naive statement. The part of, and it's most likely just as hard to be a man, well, if I read the next bit, maybe you understand what I mean by that. But I think what I was really trying to get across here is, like, again, this isn't about my gender and trying to live up to those gendered beauty standards. That's not why I had an eating disorder. So then it says, I feel like it's impossible to make a difference regardless of how you look, how intelligent you are. This is the reason I focus on who I am in the eyes of the outside world. I can change me, I can change the simple things. What's interesting about that is that does indicate that, like, the eating disorder was a little bit about changing things aesthetically. And, but it, yeah, I know I'll come on to some of the bits about kind of the real challenges that I think I was facing. But an eating disorder, like I said, I guess there's several factors at play. But there was something about being able to do something that did have an impact on external appearance. Although, I mean, I had bulimia, so honestly, like, you end up so bloated, and so, like, your face, your eyes, everything is, I look back at some photos and I'm like, this is insane. Like, it definitely didn't make me more attractive. Anyway, moving on. I can't be the person that I feel like I need to be. The demands on me are not to look a certain way, but to be a certain way, of which looks are only one part. In fact, physically, I believe there is an acceptance that we all look different. Again, like, I know that's naive to write that now. How can there be best when no one is even comparable? So I think what I'm saying here is, like, from my own perspective, I see, like, beauty in all different shapes, sizes, whatever, you know, like, I see just people, as being different, as looking their own way. So for me internally, like, definitely none of this was about an aesthetic thing. And then I say, other aspects, however, are much harder to reconcile. In fact, most of my life I have felt that I have to unpretty myself so I don't look like I'm trying too hard. So this really indicates to me when I probably wrote this, which was, I think, round about when I was doing my PhD, or maybe like in the first couple of years of my working life. This idea of having to, like, unpretty yourself, again, it, like, sounds a little bit arrogant, but I think what I was really talking about here was the fact that I actually did enjoy things like fashion and beauty, but I was in fields and I was in the workplace, or I was in a scientific lab where other people didn't care about those things. And in fact, like, the fact that I kind of looked like a little Barbie, which I actually didn't. I mean, I was probably similar to how I am now in terms of, like, aesthetically. I'm not like super girly, but I do like flamboyant things sometimes. And so if I was to, like, go all out in terms of what I wanted to dress in, I felt like I was so different to other people that they would look down their nose at me, and I was already struggling to fit in different ways. So that, I think that that's what I'm referring to there. Then I come on to this next section, and this is really where we get into, like, those minds that overwork and feel like you don't fit. So I should work hard, I shouldn't be stressed, I should be sociable, I should be happy, I should be intelligent, I should be kind, I should be able to afford a mortgage, I should have a tight-knit group of friends, I should be happy with my sexuality but not flaunt it, I should have a lover, husband, partner, I shouldn't let men treat me like a mug, I should have a well-defined job title, I should be creative, I should be just the right amount of rich, I shouldn't care about money, I should be fit, I should be healthy, I should be close to my family, I should tell my mum or sister everything. I shouldn't judge people. I shouldn't give people too many chances. I shouldn't tolerate global atrocities. I should campaign for us to all live fair, happy lives. I should follow a whole set of rules that have been predetermined and yet implemented differently by everyone and everything that I see. It goes on forever. So this part is really the part that indicates, and do I believe in all of those shoulds anymore? No, I don't. Although, like, is there part of me that still buys into a lot of that stuff? Yes, probably. But the difference between who I am now and who I was then is that I couldn't see myself at the center of all of that. So all I could ever find was everybody else all around me and like all these things that I thought we had to be in life, in society, in the workplace, in relationships. And I had no idea how to just be me in the center of all of that. So that's what all of that represents. This sense of, I don't know what the rules are, and yet I need some rules to follow. I felt so lost, and it was incredibly difficult. And so what I do know now is that as somebody who masked for a really long time, and it goes back to that sentence in the first bit about, like needing to focus on the outside world. I think that for me was about, at the end of the day, you kind of do need to focus on the outside world in order to like earn a salary, right? And independence was always something that's been really important to me, probably more so than anything else. And I think that's where a lot of this stems from. I felt like I needed to kind of carve my path out there in the world. And in order to do that, you have to be able to please other people. You have to be able to fit in to these other sets of rules that don't make any sense. And you're told one way when you're in school and when you're with your family, and then when you get out into maybe your first jobs, it's one way, and then things shift, things change. And so it feels very confusing, like what actually should you be? So like of all of those lists of things like I should do this, blah, 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 a friend asked me, because I showed them this, and they were like, well, do you still think this? Do I think I should work hard? Yes, I do still believe that. Like, I believe in working hard because I enjoy it, because I feel like I'm given one life, because it's a way to make an impact, to make a difference. But should work feel really hard and like you're out of place and feel really difficult all the time? No. So that's like an example there, and that's the difference between where I was now and where I am now and where I was then, which is that I know now that like I make a choice to do that. It's not about I should. It's like I make choices because I want to achieve certain things. Like even this, like I shouldn't be stressed. I mean, being stressed is, sure, yeah, like none of us want to feel, well, certainly I think what I meant then was quite a lot of anxiety. What's interesting here is I didn't mention, and I haven't mentioned in all of it, like anything to do with anxiety or depression, because there was still massive stigma around mental health. And to even say like I'm depressed was something like I didn't really realize until I was looking back on it, or to say I was anxious. Or yes, I eventually had a diagnosis of general anxiety disorder, but yeah, so this sense of what I was experiencing at the time, which was like really overwhelming anxiety, and I went through bouts of depression as well. Like that idea of like, well, there's something wrong with me because that's what I'm experiencing, in the sense of like there's something wrong at the core of me, not this is a thing that's happening to me and I need to figure out how to manage it so I can walk through my life in a way that just feels more pleasant and isn't in fight and flight all the time. Like back then I didn't realize that, it was not something that I understood. I just felt like, yeah, at the core of me there's something really wrong. I don't know how to deal with it, and I'm going to kind of hide it actually, and I'm going to bury it, and I'm going to bury it in an eating disorder. I'm going to bury it by binging every single night. I'll push myself through work and then just shove food in and hope that makes it go away, and then release that later on, and that makes me feel like a tiny bit better momentarily until it makes me feel a hell of a lot worse. I do think this thing of, that you can see there's aspects of me here that I've let go of, and there's aspects that I've kept with me. This sense of like I should be sociable is something that you can see even back then. Like I really struggled with that. And also the idea of relationships. I should have a tiny group of friends. I should have a lover, husband, partner. I should be happy with my sexuality but not flaunt it. Like thinking that all of those things were part of what were important because the people around me were like settling down and having families, and I've never seen that as something that I've wanted. And so it's interesting to read that, because I felt like I was different because of that. But I knew even back then that was none of those things were things I actually wanted. I thought they were just things I should be doing. But also you can see things that I really do carry with me now. Like, I shouldn't tolerate global atrocities. I should campaign for us to all live fair and happy lives. I still believe in that, and I have found different ways to work towards that, like my own tiny little pieces of the puzzle. But that's where I've really found that I have found my own path, and I have been able to walk my own way by like chipping away at certain things, and in a very roundabout way eventually finding myself in a place where I can be in some of the rooms where things actually happen, And then let's go on to the final paragraph. I have an eating disorder because I feel like I'm out of control of my own happiness. I feel like I need too much, and like everything is so far out of my grasp. My eating disorder just allows me to turn a blind eye to the failure of myself, but even more importantly, the failure of society to accept me. It was reading that last line that just made me go, should have known I was autistic all along. This is where, like I said, it very much was not about aesthetics. It was about having something to control, which is very normal in eating disorders. And that idea of like wanting too much but feeling like everything is out of my grasp. I think that that's still something I do experience, but I feel like I said, I have a bit of a path to walk now. And that's because I've prioritized the right things. I don't sit here getting hung up on the fact that, oh, should I be like having a partner or a family? Should I be being social all the time and everything else? It's like, no, I don't need those things. I don't have to live up to all of those things. I know what's important to me now. But back then, I did know what was important to me, but I didn't know I was allowed to go after those things that were important to me. So I would just like squish down any of those desires, any of that ambition, like hide it beneath something, because I just didn't know how to achieve things and how to reach where it was I wanted to go, how to feel like I was actually making a difference with the things that I was doing in my life. It allows me to turn a blind eye to the failure of myself. Like, I have often felt like a failure, and I have high expectations, but I wouldn't want to change those high expectations. Are they connected to autism? Are they connected to thinking differently? I think that what that's connected to is that I think in a very big picture way. I'm a systems thinker, and I can see how like small things connect to the bigger things. But I always struggled because I couldn't get on those paths for myself. So I think the way in which that's connected to my autism is that it's the way of thinking, but I think it's also like feeling really out of place in the workplace, really struggling with those unwritten rules, and therefore not feeling like I could show up, work hard, then make a difference. And yeah, and I guess that's the final reflection, really. So is this something you've experienced? I'd be interested to understand if you've had connection between eating disorder and autism. I know, of course, for many people, especially of those of us who get diagnosed later in life, then eating disorders, any like mental health is a sign. And it's one of the actual symptoms that they'll look back at in history. And yeah, eating disorders is one of them. And I know that it was a part of me getting my diagnosis because I have a pattern of that anxiety. I didn't go to the doctor for about a decade before with my eating disorder, but once I did, that's obviously like in my medical records. So that was part of my diagnosis. And there has been research that has tied these things together. Yeah, I'd like to know if that's your experiences. I know that this kind of probably sounds really raw, really unstructured. I think my writing's got a lot better than it was then. Some of that didn't really make full sense, but at the same time, I think that was almost like a stream of consciousness or a diary or something. I don't know, but I just found it, and it was it's quite profound to look back. And I just hope if anyone out there is kind of struggling and in that place, or recognizes not necessarily the specific things I was saying, but recognize that maybe you're in a place where you think, I can't get out of this, that I got out of it, when I had those better times, or when I had those times where I felt like actually I do want to get better, which wasn't always at all. In those moments, I would do little things that would help push me forwards and help me to get better. I would show up in life as much as I could. And so I have managed to make those changes. And like I said, thankfully, food is not something that's a big issue for me anymore, that I have to think about all that much anymore. And when it comes to autism, when it comes to these differences, where it comes to things where I stand out, I try and lean into that. Some days I feel like I can, and it feels great. Some days I feel like I want to hide. And that is still the case now, but at least I've got some understanding of that. And I know what helps. Hope you have a really great day, and I aim to see you again very soon. Bye.